Thank you everyone for coming to this action organized by Peace Alliance Winnipeg against the war, the continuing war and the continuing escalation of the war in Ukraine by Canada and by all the NATO countries. Today's action here in Winnipeg is part of a national day of actions across the country in Canada, and it's joined with international actions against the war. Many have quite rightly pointed out that this war is a NATO proxy war. And there was, a year ago, there was the possibilities to avert this war in its entirety. There was in fact the Minsk agreements in place to provide for a pathway for peace in Ukraine. And after the war broke out, there was the possibility to end that war quickly. And in fact, there was peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. But as we know, as this war has dragged on, various facts have emerged about, first of all, how this war began, but also about what's been going on as this war has transpired and has escalated. And one of the facts that emerged is that in April, both Ukraine and Russia were very close to a peace deal. But that peace deal was scuttled by the United States and was scuttled by the United Kingdom. Because when Boris Johnson visited Zelensky in April, he said that there could be no peace deal. So as a result, you've had almost another 8 to 10 months of war that have devastated Ukraine and has cost thousands of people killed on both sides of the conflict. So yesterday, Friday, was the one-year anniversary of the war, and of course you saw across Canada, if you watched the news last night, that there were various actions that I can only characterize as maybe only very slightly interested in the question of peace in Ukraine, but more interested in the question of how this war would be escalated and pursued even with more intensity. And I have to point out that it's becoming clear that Canadians are also standing up in greater numbers against this war and questioning it. And in fact, yesterday on the Peace Alliance website, we published some information about polling in Canada that generally shows that only about a third of Canadians support any kind of continuation of Canada's support for the war, either financially or with weapons. So I think it's very important that this movement is developing. We saw very good actions here today, very good responses from the people on the street today in support of really a fundamental demand that has been there from day one, which is ceasefire, negotiate peace. And I have to say that's very much missing from what the Canadian government is saying, because anytime you hear a spokesperson for the Canadian government, whether it be Anita Anand, Justin Trudeau, Melanie Joly, all they talk about is that this war is going to go on. And they talk about a war that its objective is to defeat Russia. Any such war is going to be a very dangerous war. And we know it runs the risk of escalating even to nuclear war. So I think it's very important that these actions take place, that Canadians express their anger that this war is continuing, that Canada is continuing to fuel it. Now today, as part of this hysteria about war, of course in the last few weeks we've heard the hysteria about balloons over Canada and the United States. And so you may be wondering why we had balloons here today, but it was actually to poke fun at this hysteria, which is also very dangerous. And while we're poking fun at it, it's very dangerous because it's hysteria aimed at whipping up the ideas that there should be even greater conflict with China, and that China is somehow Canada's enemy. So while we're poking fun at it, it's also a very dangerous question. And that's why we've put targets on 2 of those balloons. And in fact, some of these balloons have actually been shown to be really just put up by various amateurs, hobby groups, who put up balloons to study the weather, to study the various patterns in the atmosphere and so on. So it's hysteria, it's dangerous hysteria, and Canadians should also oppose that. So with that, down with war, down with the hysteria for war, and down with this kind of ridiculous concept that the mainstream media is promoting, where there can be no real discussion about what is going on in Canada, what's going on with the war in Ukraine, what's going on in internationally in terms of what are the just positions. And just on a last point, I want to talk about an event that's coming up on March 31st, because part of the psychosis and the hysteria for war has been to ban any discussion about what's really happening. And in fact, Ethnorama News, which has carried news stories and opinion pieces about the war, has come under a kind of censorship for its views. And so on March 31st, March 31st, there's going to be a fundraiser for Ethnorama News, and on the question of free speech for peace. Because the question of free speech for peace is very important. It's been the way in which the mainstream media and even to a large degree the Canadian government has controlled the dialogue about this war. So free speech for peace is a very important question. A few weeks ago at Carleton University, there was an event hosted by the Ottawa Peace Council on the pathways for peace to Ukraine, to end the war in Ukraine. That event was attacked as being nothing more than propaganda, Russian propaganda. So it shows how dangerous the situation has become when anyone who's talking about peace and finding solutions for peace is simply labeled a Russian propagandist. So come March 31st, we have this event. It's an important event not only for Ethnorama News, but to also raise this question of the kind of censorship that's been going on in the media, in the government, and in general about what are the causes of this war. So with that, I just wanted to conclude by again thanking everyone coming out. Tomorrow at 1 p.m. there's a rally here for Manitoba-Cuba solidarity to oppose the continuing embargo on Cuba and the continuing attacks on Cuba. So we hope to see you tomorrow, same place, 1 p.m.
And it'll be warmer tomorrow.
And it'll be warmer tomorrow, hopefully. Thank you.